Happy Tuesday night, everybody. My name is Morgan Roth, the Motor City Madmouth, and I am pleased to be joined by a guy who I've really admired in the business. I do call him a colleague because we've only got 4 decades in the business anyway. And I want to welcome Dave Barnett, formerly of ESPN, to the show. Dave, I know we're going to have an awful lot of fun. Thanks for doing this.
My pleasure, Scott. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. So, let's go ahead and give everybody an overview of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about, some of your stops along the way and give young broadcasters an opportunity to get a little bit of advice from you as well. We'll go from there. So when I do these shows here, they go by quick, but we have a lot of fun. With that said, Dave, I have to ask you, how much did you enjoy working at ESPN? Because I noticed you were very versatile covering college football and basketball.
College football, college basketball, NBA, and a lot of Major League Baseball and college baseball, and some golf and some track and field. And I think I did some volleyball too. So, yeah, that was the place, and still is, for most people, the place to be. For someone like me who prides himself in versatility and has always wanted to do play-by-play since the age of 8. So from 1996 to 2009, right square in the middle years of my career. And as I look back now, Scott, really the best possible time to have been at ESPN. The arrow was still pointing nowhere but up. No one had heard of something called cord cutting. No one could imagine that people would decide they could live without cable. So things were getting better every year and sports were being added. There was always more to do. Production budgets, usually if you had a good idea, then it would get okayed because the object was do the best show possible. And now, unfortunately, it's more like do the best show possible without showing all the corners we're now cutting because of all the cord cutters. I got a chance to do every sport I had ever imagined myself doing and a few that I had never imagined myself doing.
So I have to ask you, who is your favorite color analyst that you work with? Because with the amount of sports you threw out there, I know there's got to be one or two, three that you really enjoy working with the most.
Well, if I pick one, then it's sort of a diss to everybody else. I've been very fortunate. There's never been a partner that I've been paired with that I didn't enjoy. That's absolute truth. I would say if I have to narrow it down to one, I would have to go by sport. And probably I'd say for football, Bill Curry. Bill Curry and I did football most of the years we were both at ESPN. And, somebody I grew up watching when he was playing for the Packers and Colts, and then watched him coach. And as a matter of fact, the first game I did after I had been hired by ESPN in 1996 was Kentucky against Louisville. That turned out to be the final season for Bill coaching Kentucky. And the very next year, he's my partner. And we had, I think, a really good relationship in the booth. I think we worked really well together, played off each other pretty well. But the best part of working with Bill was getting to know Bill and getting to become a friend. Still, I would count him as one of the best friends I have in the world. So I would have to say for football, probably Bill. For baseball, that's harder because I work with a real wide variety of people. I would put Joe Morgan certainly at the top. Had an absolute blast every game I ever got to do with Joe. Mm-hmm. Part of the fun of working with Joe was never knowing who he would be bringing along in the booth as his guest. Sometimes it would be Ray Charles. Sometimes it was Danny Glover or John McEnroe. Wow. That was, you just never knew with Joe who he was going to be hanging out with on a given night. With the Rangers, the years that I worked with the Rangers, it's all pretty much with Tomgrieve, and he's just retired after last season. Mr. Ranger, one of the original players, later became general manager. And for, I think, pretty close to 30 years, he did Ranger TV. Basketball, again, I work with so many great partners. It's really hard to think of just one. But the ones that I work with at ESPN that immediately come to mind, Bill Raftery, did a lot of Big Ten games with him. He is every bit as fun to work with as you would think. Really? If all you've done is watch him on TV, yeah, that's not an act. That's who Raft is. Always fun working with Dick Vitale.
I was going to ask you that one, but all right, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, usually a few games a year with Dickie V. Len Elmore and Quinn Buckner. I did a lot of especially Big Ten games with both of them. You know, legends as players and fantastic people. When I was doing the Spurs, which was 9 years, most of those years were with Kobe Dietrich, former player for the Spurs, and a lot like Bill Curry, just became a really good, close friend. And to this day, I would still say he's probably one of my best friends. So, I mean, that's a long list. It's not the answer to your question, but I can't give you just one partner.
You really think I was thinking of all those you were going to give me one? Come on, give me that anyway. I got to tell you something about Dick Vitale, though. When I was working at WXYZ Radio back in 1979 as a producer for that show, Dick Vitale and I became friends at the time when he was at University of Detroit, and he was on the show before I was, so therefore our paths had crossed before I took my spot in the producer's room. So, you know, and then I ended up catching up with him out in Sarasota, Bradenton area, because that's where I live. There's no way I expected you really to go out there and give me one, but you know what? Like you are. You know, I wouldn't have expected anything less than what you just threw at me. I'm good, man. And that's exactly what this whole show is going to be about, is the ability to pick your brain a little bit and find out a lot of things when you go down memory lane, that's for sure. And I think that's the thing that I think is just so cool about the whole thing. And, you know, what can I say? So, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and put a guy on from the chat room in a moment because he does have a question with you. But, you know, when I think about the way, you know, you talked about, you know, you're wanting to be a play-by-play when you were 8. My Aunt Tina out in Detroit, I was doing play-by-play games with the sound off doing the Red Wings, and I idolized Bruce Barnes. So it's in your blood early.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Dave, it's in your blood. Yeah. And I haven't done as much play-by-play. I've done a lot more in terms of writing, and I've done broadcasting on the air, you know, with radio shows. And now these things here. And you know what? When you get a feel for the mic, you definitely get a feel for the mic for sure. So, you know, and obviously, so I'm going to go to a guy named Will Vogel. He's one of my aspiring broadcasters. I'm going to put it up there, and I'll let you respond to this. He says, "Hi, Mr. Barnett. Huge fan of your work, sir. And thank you for answering my question. Was there a certain guy you tried to model yourself after for broadcasting? I have mentors like Scott here." Nice of you to say.
Yeah, thank you. Very nice comments. Yeah. I didn't have one particular role model. Growing up in the Dallas area, I was really fortunate because there was a different great role model every season. For football season, you know, I grew up listening to Vernelundquist doing the Cowboys on radio. And before that, Frankglieber, who also did football, basketball, golf for CBS for a number of years. Was sports director of my first station, KRLD in Dallas.
Right.
Brad Sham still voiced the Cowboys. He and Vern were the Cowboy play-by-play team my first year, and I got to sit in the booth as their associate producer. I helped line up the halftime and post-game shows. Those two, for baseball, I listened to the Astros. Gene Elston was their play-by-play voice. Very colorful. Lowell Pass was his partner. The young Harry Callis, before he went to Philadelphia, was number 3 on that crew when I first started listening to Astro games. And so, you know, those were all network quality people that I was listening to every night. And I didn't have to just listen to one, because whatever was in season, I was learning just by listening to every one of those great gentlemen.
So excellent questions. Well, I'm going to read them off, but then I want to talk to you about Lundquist and then Glieber. Thanks for bringing it up, Will. Just to give you a little information about Will, he's 28 years old. He says he eats breath and sleep sports in my blood. His whole life, could hardly tell by those comments because they're pretty intelligent anyways. He says his grandfather, who lives in Denver, is friends with Vern Lundquist. So with that said, okay, let me go ahead and talk about those two guys. Okay, didn't you say at one point or another that Vern Lundquist and the late Frank Glieber were your early bosses?
Well, my first job after my junior year at North Texas was at KRLD as a minimum wage employee of the news department, basically taking in network feeds from our reporters, writing up leads, and rewriting some wire copy, rewriting the newspapers. And then it turns out that Brad Sham needed a producer for his nightly talk show. And very quickly, he and I got a pretty good working relationship going, because the sports department at that point was just Brad in the afternoons and Frank in the mornings. Frank was a morning sports anchor, and then most of the time was doing something for CBS, whatever was in season.
Right.
And then Vern was the local ABC affiliate sports director, and also did Cowboys play-by-play on radio, and Brad was his partner. And so, those were the people I was around every day. I mean, can you imagine for a 20-year-old who wanted to, do anything I could possibly get a chance to do in this business, to be around those three? I've never heard of a 20-year-old who had a better setup than the one I was, blessed with while I was actually still a college student.
No kidding. Well, I'll give you a little piece of trivia ready for this. Many years ago, when I was in my early 20s, and actually in my teens, I had an opportunity to talk to Tommylasorda, Muhammad Ali. If you look on my Facebook page, you got to look that over. Yeah, don't worry, the list goes on. But hey, you know what? You're in the broadcasting business, and you know full well, and I know you've heard of Ernie Harwell, right?
Oh, I used to look forward to every series with the Tigers just because I get to see Ernie in the booth next door. For 3 nights in a row, who could ask for anything better in a baseball park than Ernie Harwell right through the glass?
Yeah, well, Ernie Harwell and I were really, really close, just to let you know, Dave. We really were. He was like my adopted uncle. Let me tell you a funny story. I'm doing a show out in Phoenix, okay? And, at that time we were going through 9/11. So I asked Ernie, I need you to help me. I'm in a tough spot. So he'd ask me, well, do you need any money? Oh, no, I don't need no money from you. And he was like an adopted uncle. Well, he was. I used to call him Uncle Ernie all the time. He gave me whatever I need in terms of recommendations, all that. No, I need you to come on here for like 15, 20 minutes with these people. Is that all you needed? Yeah. I mean, come on. Is that right? Oh, hey, whatever you want, Scott. We were as close. I had his phone number. When you talk about icons and mentors, Ernie to me was he's a hero of mine. No matter what, I don't care what anybody says. And there's another story out in Arizona. He gives me a bag of nachos. I don't want this. So, well, no, I want you to have it. So, no, I don't need a bag of nachos. In fact, I have them in my studio. Says, I'll tell you what, Ernie, let's make a deal. I'll take those bag of nachos under the following condition. You have to autograph them. Oh, he pulled that out just like that. And then I have it in a little, I actually have it in my Ziploc. Then I took them. But that's, and when you know what it's like in our business, that when you develop a good rapport with a lot of people. I remember when he got unceremoniously fired by Mike Ilitch, I refused to go to a Tigers game until he was rehired. And, now going back to Joe Robbie Stadium is what I call it. To me, what was interesting about the whole thing was, you know what? I want to talk to you, but are you willing to talk about your unceremonious? I'll talk whatever you want. Just like you did when we talked on the phone. And yeah, I
Mhm.
don't care. I mean, you know, because when a guy trusts you and they know it's going to be a clean show, they realize that your reputation is really what makes you, what breaks you in this industry, anyways. And I try to keep everything laid back to people and do the best I can. And those are one of the things that he taught me at an early age. And here we are. I mean, you know, echoing those to the people that I have. So let's go ahead and talk about Texas, because obviously that's a state that you live in. So I'm going to break down, you know, you can spend as much time or little time on each of these, because then I want to also have more students out there hopefully watching as well, learning from you like we all had a chance to learn from somebody else. So we'll talk about your time in Texas, what defines you, and your breakdown of your tenures of the following teams. You said you worked with the Dallas Mavericks, right? What was that like?
Mhm. It was incredible. I was 23. I was, for 1 year, the youngest broadcaster in the NBA until the next year when Kevin Harlan was hired by the Kings. And for the rest of my tenure, I was the second youngest broadcaster in the NBA. So they, showed a lot of faith in me based on my having covered them just basically as a reporter in the first year of the Mavericks, which was 1980-81. Their original play-by-play voice was Mark Holtz, who had come from Denver. He had done some Nuggets basketball and mostly Denver Bears AAA baseball. And after one Maverick season, he was immediately hired away by the Rangers because he was incredibly good play-by-play, anything he did. But his first love was baseball. The Rangers found that out. And about 6 weeks before the start of the second Mavericks season, which was 81-82, the Mavericks need a play-by-play broadcaster.
Wow.
And so they're limited to people locally. It wasn't time for a nationwide search. And people who were not under contract. Well, I was local. I was far too unimportant to be under contract at KRLD. And the guy who probably would have gotten the job had he not been under contract was Brad Shab, who I'd been working with for 3.5 years at that point at KRLD. And I don't know if Brad would have given up the Cowboys to do the Mavericks, but I think he would have loved having the chance to decide that. But he was under contract, I wasn't, and so I got the job. You know, I was basically learning how to do an NBA caliber broadcast on the job as an NBA broadcaster. That whole first year, my memory is just trying to keep up with the speed of the game on radio. And it made me much more compact with the language because I quickly discovered, I can't describe something in 10 or 12 words. I need to figure out a way to say it in 2 or 3 words.
Right.
So that was kind of the project first year. But just an incredible experience at that young age to get to just, see that much NBA basketball, because this was really the beginning of what became the golden era of Bird and Magic, and Michael Jordan hadn't come along yet, but he was a couple of years away. And so every year, the quality of the sport got better. And the team I was broadcasting got better every year, the Mavericks. So, I could not possibly have come along at a better time. I'll say that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. I believe if I remember correctly, and then I'll let everybody know how they can find us. But I believe the coach at the time was Dick Motta, wasn't it?
Dick Motta had a couple of years before that, he had won his championship with the Washington Bullets and was available, as it turned out, 1980, when the Mavericks were granted the franchise. And at that time was the third winningest coach in NBA history. And so that made him a pretty easy hire, especially for a brand new franchise. And team got better every year, a little bit better every year. And by the time he'd finished his tenure there with the Mavericks, it's a playoff team, challenging the Lakers for supremacy in the West.
Yeah, and then I believe after that, John McLeod followed him, didn't he?
John McLeod, right, had a lot of success with Phoenix, and his first year was the winningest season that the Mavericks had at that point, and took the Lakers all the way to Game 7 of the Western Conference Finals. As a matter of fact, as close as the Mavericks had been from that point until they finally won it, which was many years later, not until 2011.
Yeah, well, I mean, you and I could, who knows how many shows we could do together to reminisce. But, you know, at least we're giving everybody a chance to talk about how two guys, I covered the Bad Boys back in the day. I should point out, though, that the audio version of the Sports Exchange can be heard on iHeartRadio. I'm sure you heard that one, right, Dave? Okay, Apple, Spotify,
Yep.
or wherever you get your podcasts. So please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers. Not quite there yet, but we're working as hard as we can to get them. Please also comment, like, and share the broadcast. Want to be a guest? No problem. Send topic ideas to South Florida Tribune at gmail.com. And if you want to advertise, call me at 954-304-4941. Let everybody know that we are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and our YouTube channel. So with that said, yeah, I had an opportunity to cover the Bad Boys, and that was a great time. So, all right, so let's go. You stay in basketball. You go from the Mavs over to San Antonio Spurs. And it looked like a lot of your times where you got the better part of 7-8 years, especially in which I think is really impressive. So talk about your time with the Spurs.
The Spurs had drafted David Robinson. They'd won that lottery, but they weren't getting him for a couple of years. You know, the original expectation was 4 years out of the Naval Academy, but David was 6'7" when he enrolled and 7'1" when he graduated, and so he could not fit in submarines, which was his original purpose for going to the Naval Academy. And he really couldn't do much at all, in terms of sailing or flying. And so the compromise was, well, we'll keep him for 2 years. And so those 2 years he was working on a golf course in South Carolina, as I remember. I mean, it was really just, waiting for those 2 years to elapse. And then it turned out 1989, 90 was his rookie season. Well, 1988-89, the Spurs had hired Larry Brown, fresh off winning the national championship at Kansas. Mm-hmm. And year before that, they drafted David, and so it was obvious that they were going to get really good really fast. I loved San Antonio, my favorite city growing up. Anytime we got to visit, and then the other factor was in Dallas, there was very little TV for me. I'd been hired to do radio, which was every game, and about 15 games were televised my first year, and then it developed that there were eventually two separate packages, and almost every game was being televised. And I was strictly doing radio, and the Spurs were offering TV. The Spurs actually were doing simulcast, so I was a one-man broadcast doing both. My feed was both on television and radio. Wow. And the way the business was evolving at that point, there was much more emphasis on TV. It wasn't to the point where fans expected every single game to always be televised. But at least 3/4 of them were. And so I knew that this is where the business was heading. I wanted to do other sports. I'd gotten a chance to do some football, not any baseball at this point. And so it was really all those factors, the fact that I loved the city of San Antonio, the team was getting better, and this was a chance to grow professionally and do, as much television as I had been doing on radio. And so all those reasons didn't make it easy that first year, 1988-89, because no David Robinson yet. And it was a very rough season, barely scratching out 21 wins. Mm-hmm. The next year, they improved to 56 wins. It was the biggest one-year improvement in NBA history. And from that point on, every game was, just a pleasure. Those David Robinson teams, as they were building, and becoming championship contenders, biggest thing in town, the Spurs have always been, the only game in town. But to see the city really get a sense of what it would be like to be a championship team, those years were fun. Just living in San Antonio, just anything having to do with the Spurs in San Antonio in that period, we're talking about most of the decade of the 1990s. I would not have wanted to be anywhere else.
I get it. Well, number one, they're most, when you talk about the ABA-NBA merger, for gosh sakes, you bring them into the mix, you get George Gervin. I know we could talk about this forever, but, you talk about the best ABA team that became an iconic NBA team. The Spurs were there. I did have a chance to see one game there when the building was called the AT&T. I don't know if they've changed the name or not, when San Antonio hosted Toronto. I want to go back to one thing, though, that was interesting about your time at ESPN. If I recall correctly, the Southwest Conference folded, but I know you had a lot of games down in that neck of the woods covering for ESPN. What was it like to cover the Southwest Conference? Because now we have all these expansion, which I'm not going to get into tonight, with all these super conferences. But the Southwest Conference is probably the best conference that probably nobody knew anything about.
Well, now nobody, tends to remember much about the Southwest Conference because it's been 27 years now,
right,
since they went out of business. But at the time, there were years where there was no question the Southwest Conference was the best conference in the country. And not just for football, the early, mid-'80s, best basketball conference in the country. I mean, think about it. Keem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, Arkansas, before they left for the SEC, powerhouse team. So, I grew up watching and listening to Southwest Conference football. That's all there was in Texas. And getting the chance to broadcast some of those games, I got to do the last 3 Texas-Arkansas games when they were still conference opponents, when they were both still in the Southwest Conference. Okay. And I grew up on, the 1969 big shootout, game of the century, 15-14. So, having a small role and even just getting to see those games, much less broadcast them as that series was coming to a close. That's beyond anything I could have dreamed as a kid.
Well, you got 2 broadcast vets like you and me that know about it, so that's why I mentioned it. So, all right, let's move on to the Texas Rangers. You had a pair of stints there. One lasted, I believe, a year, and then the other ones they brought you back in from 2009 to 12. First time was 1990. So, tell me a little bit about your work with the Rangers.
Well, I was really surprised, actually, to get the chance in 1990. It was home games only. The package was split back then. Mm-hmm. And it was also a huge surprise that one of my partners was Brad Sham, who I would basically work for and with my very first job at KRLD. And so he and I and Jim Sundberg and Greg Lucas in various combinations did all the home games that year in 1990. Yeah. I had first crack at calling Nolan Ryan's 300th career win.
No way.
He didn't have it that night, and he got the 300th win on the road. Well, we didn't do the road games, so, but almost. And then, came back in 2009, and it was another case of just great timing. I happened to go to the Spurs right when they were about to become a championship team. And the Rangers were at that point. They had Nolan Ryan running things. and they were compiling the team that would win back-to-back American League championships. My second and third years there, 2010 and 2011. So it was a lot like the experience watching the Spurs get not just better every year, but dominant every year, because people had waited 40 years for the Rangers to do what they were finally able to do in those years. And so, just getting a chance to watch that, that was just a nightly magic carpet ride, both those years.
Ready for another interesting one? I've hit you with every one. I'm going to continue to answer one with another. 1987, I worked as a director of public relations for the Gastonia Rangers out in the South Atlantic League.
Yep.
Yes. You ready for this? So here you go. We lost 90 some odd games. I told the owner, the manager you're getting lost a lot of games in the Florida State League, but all I got to see was Dean Palmer, sammysosa, and Juan Gonzalez. That's all. I mean,
wow.
Yeah, and there were like 12 people, including the manager and the coaches, that made it to the big leagues for a team that lost 90. Yeah, I mean, it was just unreal. And I'll never forget the time when Juan Gonzalez was at our hotel. He took a laundry basket and flipped it over, and he was a little upset, as you can tell. So, Sammy Sosa and I were pretty good friends. Sammy and I used to tease the owner, Nina, you're cheap because she didn't want to spend any money on a bag of dirt for the last stinking game of the year. Oh, and I ended up getting a one-on-one with Sammy later on. Maybe when I talk to you another time, so I don't kill you too bad on time-wise. And I know we're going to definitely stay in touch after this thing is over with, because I'm going to pick your brain anyways. But no, Sammy and I had a pretty good rapport. In fact, I will tell you this quick story, and then I want to talk about North Texas FAU, and then you'll have an opportunity to go out there and give some young people advice. So here's the deal. I cover a Marlins game. At that time, Dave, they were called the Florida Marlins, and they were playing at Joe Robbie Stadium, or whatever the heck the name is. I always call it Joe Robbie. So there's a lady named Sharon, I think Panoza, or whatever her name is, for the Cubs. I said, Sharon, I want to talk to Sammy. So she's laughing. Yeah, right. Okay. No kidding. So you know what I did? I'm on the field for batting practice. I said, hey, Sammy. And he looks at me with this big old wide smile that will take you all the way from Key West to Alaska. Hey, at that point, I caught this woman's attention. Hey, Sharon, I once had the job that you had, albeit a much smaller stage. Now, do you believe me? She gave me the most. When you talk about nonverbal communication, Dave, at its best, I got a one interview the next day, and that's the Cliff Notes version of the story. So,
Juan's got the interview.
He opened up to me. I didn't talk about the PEDs. We had too much fun in Gastonia. Who cares about the other business? I don't care about that. I try to, my goal when I do these things is bring the best out of everybody that I can, because I think there's good in everybody.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those type of people where, no, don't get me wrong. Don Zimmer, I came across him once at the Tampa Bay Rays, and I did ask him a question he didn't particularly like. I asked the guy, Don, no disrespect, but why would you go out there and try to fight Pedro Martinez? He didn't want no part of me after that one. But, I'm not afraid.
Not his favorite moment of his long career.
Yeah, but, as journalists, so we have a responsibility to ask tough questions as well as the easier ones. If we don't, then we're only fooling ourselves, because that's our job in the business anyway. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But I don't regret asking the guy that, but that's beside the point. All right. You're wearing an interesting shirt called University of North Texas Mean Green, if I'm seeing it correctly here. So
yes, you are.
So with that said, I know you've been there since 15. How much fun do you told me it was your alma mater. How much fun are you having working for them?
Once again, perfect timing on my part. I show up, and then, they have history making seasons. It's my alma mater. Grew up going to games here in Denton. I saw Mean Joe Green play. As a matter of fact, there's not that many of us still around who saw him at Old Faust Field, but went to school here, and anything they have ever asked me to do ever since, I have, if it's at all possible, I have said yes, because I would not have the career I've had if I'd gone anywhere else to school. And a lot of people would say that this has been a launching pad for a lot of great broadcasting careers. So, yeah, the years that I've been here since 2015, that was a rough season for football. And then the next year, Seth Luttrell came, and his tenure just ended. He lifted the program to the point where most years, they're competing for a conference championship, getting into bowls, didn't take the next step and win the bowls or win a conference championship.
Mm-hmm.
And so Eric Morris is now taking over. He had been Washington State offensive coordinator, and he is going to be really Texas-centric in terms of recruiting. The staff he's hired, a lot of former Texas high school head coaches, and so that's kind of the emphasis is get people to stay here. It's, I think, going to be easier to recruit in the American than it was in Conference USA, the higher profile conference.
Right.
And then for basketball, just completed the greatest season in school history, winning the NIT. When Grant McCaslin took over, getting an invite to a tournament like the NIT would have been beyond imagination for most fans. And he took over and immediately completely transformed the product and the culture. And last 2 years, they've led the nation in scoring defense, 25 wins last year, 31 wins, NIT championship this year. Right. With the highest caliber of people, too, his staff and the players he's recruited. Never been around more enjoyable people that are just, all about winning, having fun, doing everything the right way, and having this, incredible success that no one would have thought possible before. So, again, great timing on my part to get to see, teams having unprecedented success. That's kind of a recurring theme in my career.
Well, doing this show, there's a lot of recurring things. The people that you name drop, Mean Joe Green, I had the opportunity to meet him years ago in Phoenix. And, I always said, Mean Joe, you inspired a whole entire audience when you did that Coca-Cola commercial. And then I told him, because he was assistant coach at the time, Dave, for, I believe, Dave McGinnis. And I always thought that if there's ever a guy who deserved a head coaching job, Mean Joe Green should have gotten one. That never, unfortunately, worked out. So all right, you talk about the success in North Texas. There's no way I cannot ask you this, but FAU had a pretty good run in the Final Four. So were they that good? And could they have given Connecticut a better game than what we saw against San Diego State? I know that's a two-part question, but you said you faced them a couple times in Conference USA.
Yeah.
The ride they had was nothing short of remarkable.
Yes, they're that good. No one won more games than FAU this year. You can't do that if you're not legit. I think they would have given UConn a better game. I think because they have everybody on the floor is either a really mobile 3-point threat or a big time threat in the low post. And San Diego State didn't have that kind of balance to their roster. No. Any combination Florida Atlantic has on the court, everyone is dangerous. Every person is either, a low post scorer, and Golden and Rosado, they're bigs, or everybody on the perimeter could drive or pull up and hit threes. That's why they were so difficult to deal with. You'd get maybe, 2 or 3 guys with an off night, but here's 2 other guys, they're having career nights. That was kind of how their season went. And I don't think they would have had the long scoring droughts that San Diego State had. I don't know how much they would have held down UConn, but they definitely would have had much more offense than San Diego State had.
Well, I can tell you this is Dusty May. We know was getting a big pay raise. And number 2, you never know in a year or two whether he'll get one of those blue blood programs because I had a chance to meet the guy last week. He's a very class act. All right, let's turn our attention over to young broadcasters. I know you and I started a little
Okay.
bit earlier, and I think this is a part of the show I've enjoyed everything with you anyways, so that's beside the point. But now let's appeal to some of our other young broadcasters, like Will, for example, and the others. So, what tips would you give to young broadcasters who want to do play-by-play?
Well, I would think about who you think does a good job. Because you probably have, I would think, a few broadcasters that you're probably watching and thinking, "Wow, I think he's good or she's good or whatever." I would encourage you to be analytical about it, to not just listen, not just watch, but really study what it is that you like that you think do really well, and maybe how they do something that's different than people at other networks or on other sports. So, that's not so that you'll sound like them. That is another piece of advice: is do not try to sound like anyone but yourself. What you're trying to do is get good influences, and that's why I said be analytical about what it is you think they do well,
right,
and incorporate that into your own personality and your own approach, just in terms of the kind of information you're trying to gather and disseminate. I think it's really incumbent this time that we're living in to take advantage of technology. You can get your own stream going. You can record yourself doing games, either on the bleachers, local ballpark, or whatever, or sitting at home. And so just give yourself reps and listen back to yourself, really being critical. Analyze what you sound like as opposed to the last time you were listening to yourself, and try and chart your own improvement. So I think that's it. Just look for opportunities to give yourself reps. Try to study the very best influences, the people that you think do a good job, not to sound like them, but to try to compile information, and have a sense for storylines and big moments, how to emphasize, and sometimes just get out of the way. Sometimes, there's no better sound than a roaring crowd. There's a lot of games where there's nothing a broadcaster can add that's going to enhance the experience any more than just shutting up. So I think all those factors, I think it all amounts to, in a big picture sense, trying to realize what you want to sound like and why. And have that as a starting ground. And then it's like any other job. It's just the more you do it, the better you'll get. And it's a matter of, stick-to-itiveness in a lot of cases. If things don't immediately happen for you, then look for some different opportunities, maybe. Make yourself a little more versatile.
Well, amazingly enough, when I grew up as a kid, I was always a radio guy anyway, so I didn't care if I wore a pair of jeans at the station. Nobody was going to see it anyways. Nowadays, you get these cameras in front of you, so you're conscious a little bit more of what you look like because more people are going to put eyes on you. But I think everything you're saying makes a tremendous amount of sense for sure. You just have to be yourself and go out there. But the biggest thing I've always learned, you better prepare for what you're doing, or you're gonna, because people will read into you. So I can tell you many years when I would go to the Silverdome cover the Lions games, because I covered a lot of the major force teams in Detroit. But I keyed in on the Lions and Pistons because they were in the suburbs. I lived there, and I would get down to Tiger Stadium, and I would get down to JLA every once in a while. But I would get to a 1:00 game about 8, 9 in the morning, never leave till 6, because I wanted to make sure that everything I was ready to do, I highlighted everything. We're not geniuses when we get there. We need PR people to make us look somewhat smart. But the biggest thing you have to do is be prepared. So as I look back on what you're doing now, are you at peace working with North Texas and not working on a national level? Because obviously, it is your alma mater. I'm not saying you don't want to work on the national level, but at your age right now, like I am, I'm a little over 60, around that age. But sometimes it doesn't hurt to be more local instead of being under fire on the national level. If you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I am completely at peace, actually. And it's partly because I'm not just broadcasting, I'm also an adjunct professor of journalism at AUNT. And so that's been a really good balance. 2 classes and 2 sports, football and men's basketball. And the more I've taught, this is my second semester teaching, and the more I'm doing that, the more I enjoy it, and the more I realize that I can contribute as much or more in a classroom at this point as being on the air. There's really not that many experiences on the air that I haven't had.
Right.
Especially when I think back of what I would have thought was realistic as a kid, and I've shot so far beyond what I thought was possible in College World Series and Rose Bowls and Orange Bowls and NBA playoffs, College World Series, on and on. And so it's not like there's one more event that I've not gotten a chance to call. Yeah, it would have been great to call a Super Bowl, but called NBA championships, Rose Bowl. It's pretty hard to top that. And I'm less and less in love with traveling. I think most of us who have been doing it this long, that's basically what I think got Vernelundquist to retire. He just had enough of traveling from Steamboat Springs to, Columbia, South Carolina, or wherever they were sending him. And so, at this point, as I said, I'm enjoying the teaching part as much or more as I enjoy the broadcasting. So it's a good balance that I'd like to keep going for as long as I can.
All right, folks, just in case you're joining us, I'm speaking with former ESPN announcer Dave Barnett. You want to talk about versatility. This guy is it. So, hopefully you have an opportunity to watch the show if you're just catching us later. So, great segue, boy. Then again, what I expect anything less out of you when it comes to segues of us in this business. So, let's talk about your best moments and calls during your play-by-play as a broadcaster. Now, am I going to think I'm going to nail you down to one? No, you're way smarter than that after what I hit you with the partners. So, I'm kind of expecting you to mention a few of them. But, like anything, you always have your signature calls and things that do stand out a little bit. And we know you've done a lot.
Well, again, we got to go sport by sport. If you're asking for greatest moments, the one last Thursday night is the greatest moment in sports history for my alma mater. You can't top calling an NIT championship. For a school that, as I said not that long ago, just getting an invite to the NIT would have been beyond belief. So that's the most recent one. For basketball, so David Robinson scored 71 points to nail down a scoring championship on the last day of the season. Quadruple double by the Admiral. Saw that. Wow. Again, it's an unfair question. There's too many. So I think I'll just narrow it down to championships. Got to call a lot of great moments for national championship seasons. Michigan football, 1997. A lot of the basketball that I called at ESPN were teams en route to national championships. Every one of those stands out. Every rivalry game. We got, to do a UCLA USC football, Purdue Indiana basketball.
Yeah.
On and on. those Texas-Arkansas games.
What about Michigan, Ohio State? You ever do that one?
I've done Michigan, Ohio State, baseball and basketball, but never football.
Well, I knew you were going to tell me it was an unfair question because when you've been in the business 40 years, we're not expecting you to be able to list them off 1 through 50. But at least you're able to answer a lot of the gist of it because, hey, listen, if you're a young pup in it, you can figure it out pretty quickly. If you're a cagey veteran like you are, it's okay. I get it, and I breathe you all the way, Dave. I really do. So, I'll bet you could do.
I'll tell you another one. I did just think of one, and that led me to another one. Okay. 4 home runs by Josh Hamilton.
Okay.
In Baltimore. Even more unusual than that. This was 2009. In fact, one of my first Ranger games, also against Baltimore. 6-hit cycle by Ian Kinsler.
Wow. That
is even rarer than a 4-homer game. And he had it by the 7th inning, if you can imagine that. A 6-hit cycle completed with a triple in the 7th inning. Yeah, that's like once a century stuff.
Hey, listen, you want me to make it a more fair question the next time it comes up? Here's what I'll do. I'll give you more prep when we do it. We'll talk about Dave Barnett's best moments, give you a little more time, and we can narrow it down to 20 or 30 with more prep. But you answered it pretty well, knowing that you didn't have a chance to see the question in advance. But guys like you can come up with them because you've done a lot. So I give you more credit than you get. But hopefully if we ever have another opportunity to do this thing, we'll give you more time to prep and then you can write it down. And I guarantee a lot of people will be tuning in for that one for sure. So I'm going to ask you.
Okay, I accept.
Well, good. I'm hoping this isn't a one-trick pony with shows all with you and I, because I feel I feel like I've known you a long time because of the fact that we have been around a long time, albeit in different cities. So, I got a lot of ideas that the two of us can go out there and talk about, and that'll be one I'm actually going to circle down the road. So, have you ever thought about doing hockey, though?
I should not be allowed within a mile of a hockey broadcast.
Really?
No, I would be a disaster doing hockey. I did not grow up around hockey. We don't play hockey growing up here. I mean, kids now can, but no, it's never a sport that I've really felt like I truly understood. So yeah, you don't want me anywhere near a rink.
Well, it's amazing how you bring that up. Okay. When I saw Jim Nance about a year and a half ago, or National Sports Media Association, I don't know if you belong to them, but I obviously do, and I'm still a member. I once asked Jim Nance a question if he ever wanted to do baseball. I said, oh, no, he's content with golf and basketball as well as football. So,
well, he could do baseball. That's the difference. I could not do hockey. Jim Nance could do baseball.
But judging by the way his response was, whether he could or not, he doesn't want to be bothered with it because let's face it.
Well, that's a different thing, though. That's different.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, guys like you that have been doing it for a long time on the national level as well as at the local level, I've always loved baseball because I think, correct me if I'm wrong on this, to be a good baseball broadcaster, you have to be dedicated, prepared, and willing to spend a lot of time at the ballpark and getting to know people. And I'm not saying Jim doesn't do that, but baseball is a different animal. I know that they got different rule changes, which we'll deal with another time. But baseball is just, to me, it's a sport that will challenge you in so many different ways, and you cannot fake it in baseball. You have to have a good perspective about the history of the game, as well as the rule changes and the camaraderie in and out of the clubhouse. And let's face it, you've done it yourself, both on many different levels. So I'm sure you can face it.
Yeah. Everything you said is definitely true. You have to, at least until this year, prepare for every baseball game, assuming that it's going to be 10-0 in the bottom of the second, and it's going to be 4.5 hours of nothing but you trying to keep people from turning the channel. Now that they've gone to the speed up rules, that's no longer the case. Now baseball is actually an action sport again, the way it was, when we were growing up. And, the time of the game was 2 hours and 14 minutes, and that wasn't unusual. Well, now we're getting back to that. And I would love to do some MLB now, because the focus is no longer on, the gimmicks that kind of took over when the analytics took over the sport in the last decade or so. And now it's back to what all of us, grew up understanding as baseball. But you're right, baseball, even now, it still has the least action and requires the most storytelling and explanations, and you have time to do that, and you really need to do that in baseball. So definitely the most homework intensive sport of all the ones that I do, and it's not even close.
Oh, I believe that. So I got a couple more questions for you. First of all, give me your takes, Dave, on new media. We talk about Twitter, we talk about Facebook, Instagram, podcasts, etc. Obviously now it's being made to a lot more people. Where back when we started, if you were talented, people recognize you. It's not only what you know, but who you know. But now it's a different animal. Anybody can get on a microphone. Question is how long can you stay on it? So, but when we talk about new media in its entirety, Dave, okay, what are your thoughts about where our industry has gone?
Well, are you just talking about Twitter and Facebook, or are you talking about how play-by-play broadcasts are now all over the internet? I mean, it's all new media, really.
Yeah, now that you brought it up, why don't you kindly comment on both aspects, if that's okay with you?
It's more opportunities for play-by-play broadcasters. That's the one thing about streaming. And if you can harness the technology, then there's unlimited opportunities, really. There's always going to be high school anything, or small college anything. In terms of the social media aspect, I think it is whatever you decide you want to make of it. For me, I have really only used Twitter as a news source. It's a way for me to follow certain writers around the country, and not just the sports. Mostly I follow news columnists, and not so much as a tweeter. I've never been a big tweeter. I don't jump on and feel like that I have to share my opinions about everything under the sun, or what I had for lunch or whatever. So for the way I use it, it's been useful. I can follow a story from a lot of different angles on Twitter and sometimes on Facebook. And that limits the downside of social media, just because I'm not on it as much and I'm not using it for the same reasons that a lot of people are. So I'm not going to be ever one to get into a Twitter or for somebody. That's not why I'm on there. I'm on there to see what other people are writing.
I'm going to hit you with something that I hit everybody else with. You know what GMTA stands for? GMTA.
You'll have to refresh me. I don't think I do.
Refresh you because I made it up. Great minds think alike.
Okay.
Great mind. And that's it. And everybody that comes on, I hit them with that question. You know what? What I use Twitter for is just to take the content from the Southwest Tribune, promote it, and then tag as many people as an information source. I don't get involved with too many hot debates. I don't have time. I'm not looking to be a first-class gossiper. I have no interest in that. My goal is to educate, inform, and try to promote the broadcast on it as well. Otherwise, I have no use for going any deeper than that. But I knew I was going to get you with a GMTA. Everybody does. So I'm going to bring it. Since I brought you on, I had to do, all right, one other question here. So obviously, you're doing a lot with your time with the teaching at North Texas and the play-by-play. So, but what else are you doing with your time, and are you pleased with how your broadcasting career has turned out?
Yeah, I think I'm one of the most blessed people I know, because as we've been discussing here, I've gotten to do more than I ever would have dreamed possible. And so, every day I wake up, I'm thankful for that. As far as what else I do, I volunteer to babysit my grandkids as much as possible. I got 5 of them. As much as I can, watch their sports and cheer contests or whatever they're into. There's nothing better than that. My friends that were already grandparents told me that, and if anything, they undersold it. It's actually greater than anybody had ever said it was going to be.
So you're telling me that you really enjoy the time with your family now. It's time to step back and enjoy them. Is there anything you wish you would have done or accomplished in your career? Or are you pretty satisfied with the overall aspect of what you've done?
Yeah, I don't have any regrets because everything that happened I wouldn't have imagined was possible anyway. Almost everything that's come to me in my career is not something that I would have necessarily sought because at the time I didn't really even think I was necessarily qualified. I mean, definitely I would not have been out there applying for NBA jobs at age 23 if the one right in my backyard hadn't, suddenly become open. So, and then the choice to move to San Antonio and try to shift my career more towards television, I would do that again. Mm-hmm. The choice to, as much as I love doing the NBA, I love doing a full season with both the Mavericks and the Spurs. But when ESPN offered multi-year, all my sports, around the clock, football to basketball to baseball, I don't know anyone who would have turned that down. That's what you work for your entire career. And if I had said no, I doubt it would have come around again. They don't wait every year for you to make up your mind on things like that. When the Rangers came along, I was ready not to travel as much. And again, I knew the Rangers were going to start getting really better. So again, as I look back, I don't think any of the major decisions that I made I would do any differently. I'm just really incredibly grateful that I was in the position to make those decisions.
Well, I know a lot of my Detroit friends could make a case that George Blaha of the Pistons deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if he gets a recognition because he hasn't done as much national.
Well, I agree with them. He definitely deserves it.
Yeah. And then lastly, COVID-19, 2020. I know a lot of people look at that period that, man, I'm glad I got out at the right time because that virus turned everything upside down. Do you feel that way too? That you've scaled back at the right time, not having to deal with the lack of access that we used to have. Tom Gage of the Detroit News, I'm sure you've heard of him, very close friend of mine, a writer, said, I'm glad I got out when I did because instead of 3.5 hours before a game, I only limit you an hour. But do you feel...
Well, the thing I regret about COVID was it kept me from being on site when North Texas beat Purdue in the first round of the NCAA tournament. 2 years ago, I had to call that remote. A lot of games, everybody was calling back then, were called, from a studio or an office or anywhere but, being on site. So that was the biggest effect it had on me professionally, was not being able to be there, but having to pretend like I was there. And we've kind of gotten through that. And, for the most part, things have returned pretty close to how they were then, I think, pre-COVID.
Yeah, I think that's really refreshing that they have, Just want to let everybody know once again, if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do so at Tribune South. Our website is www.southfloridatribune.com. And I'll go over some other information in just a moment. But, Dave, like I said, I've always respected you as an announcer. Now I have the opportunity to do a show with you, a guy that I feel is my colleague, because that's exactly what you are to me, as a colleague and somebody I've respected over the years. So I know for a lot of you folks out there that haven't seen Dave's work, I would strongly encourage you to go to YouTube and look up Dave Barnett. I should also let everybody know that the audio version of the Sports Exchange can be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. So if you want to hear us, that's the ticket to do it. Please hit the red subscribe button on YouTube, South Florida Tribune. We're striving for 1,000 subscribers, and everyone matters as much as they can to give us a hand to continue to grow the platform and get it to more people. Also, please comment, like, and share the broadcast. Want to be a guest? No problem. Please send topic ideas to southfloridatribune@gmail.com. And that way we can pair you up with the right show. If you want to advertise, no problem there. Might even come up with a thing called a hat of the day, because I wear a lot of them today. It's Grand Canyon. Call 954-304-4941. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. You know, Dave, like I said, I know we've been in touch for a while. I'm just glad timing worked out to get us on here. So any closing thoughts about this? And also, before we end the broadcast, I want to let everybody know how they can get a hold of you too, my friend.
It's been fun. I appreciate you having me on. This has been a chance to talk about a lot of things I haven't had the chance to remember recently. And I'm on Twitter, Dave_L_Barnett.
Very good. So there you have it. One of ESPN's best back in the day. And with no disrespect to ESPN, kind of shifted over to Fox a little, because I think a lot of people were laid off. A lot of talented people were laid off. And, you know, I'm not going to criticize the network as a whole, but, you know, the direction that they've gone in, you know, when you lose icons like Bob Lee and you lose a lot of big people, you take away from your following too, is what you do. And I don't mind watching them occasionally. I go to Fox as well. But you know what, to me, everything about what 24-hour sports is all about is important. And like I said, Dave, I'm just so glad that our paths cross. And more importantly, as we close it up, I look forward to doing more and more projects with you as well. I'm sure that we're going to come up with, I want to do a show down the road, your top 20 or 30 moments. I'll give you ample time to research. So
I'll need it.
You ready to do that one at some point?
Yeah, I'll need a lot of research time for that. Yeah, that'd be fun.
We'll figure it out. You don't have to worry. But meanwhile, coming up after the Sports Exchange with myself and Dave Barnett, we have 108 Stitches baseball talk following. So, Dave, I can't thank you very much for your time. And it's been a pleasure talking to a colleague that I have so much respect for, from the bottom of my heart to the top of my head. Okay, it's been a blast having you on. So, on behalf of Dave Barnett, my name is Scott Morgan, Roth the Motor City Madmouth. Thank you for joining us on this edition of the Sports Exchange, and we look forward to catching you the next time.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.